Your subconscious mind is in the driver's seat and your conscious mind is in the back seat.
I've had clients come to me and say, I've been working with a psychologist for, 2 to 4 years, and all we're doing is going back and unpacking trauma and I'm reliving everything. Whereas it's a very different way that we do things through hypnosis. And we find that we can get through certain things that have taken years in a more of a, like the clinical psychology environment. We're, smashing out in 2 to 4 sessions.
We have to be very, very careful about how we communicate with our mind and our body, because it listens and it reacts based on what you tell it.
So powerful, because once you've got the awareness to something, once you bring it from the subconscious into the conscious mind, you've got, different modalities in order to know what to do with it. But if you don't know it's there, like you don't know what you don't know, but when you do know, everything changes.
Welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. My name is Stacey Uhrig. My guest today is Jen Hamilton. All her deets can be found in the show notes. I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into that, because what I want to spend the time doing today is talking about hypnosis. Jen is coming to us from Australia. So it's 7 a.m. where she is, 4 o'clock where I am when we're recording. And I really was so excited to have Jen come on, because as someone who utilizes hypnosis as a therapeutic model with my own clients, I understand the great benefit of working at the subconscious level, but not everybody does. Jen is a clinical hypnotherapist, which means she has a lot of hours and a lot of time having utilized this modality. This is what we're going to be jamming out about today. So welcome, Jen. How are you?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Stacey. It's great to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So what got you into becoming a hypnotherapist? How did you get on that path?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I was actually, I went to a hypnosis comedy show many, many years ago. And I was actually the one up on stage clucking like a chicken. And I thought, like, how did I get here? Like, what made me want to do this? And how was I being on stage under this hypnosis, but still putting on a bit of a performance? And that was many, many years ago. And when I started, I guess, going through my transformation through life, I'd been through a separation. I'd had a few children. I was at a point in my life where I wasn't quite sure what was going on. It was quite the existential crisis, really. I remember I used to go out to clubs and bars after I'd gone through a separation. I'd kind of like regress back to the party person that I was before I was in my relationship with my kid's dad. And I remember thinking to myself when I was out, I was like, I'm meeting so many women that are getting swept up by men and getting fucked over by fuck boys. And I thought to myself, I'm like, surely there's a way that I can help women. And I thought nothing more of it. And then at the time I was also managing a gym, and I remember sitting at the gym one day working away, and I was listening to a podcast, and they were interviewing a hypnotherapist, and I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like, they were talking about the subconscious, the power of the mind, our deep-seated, values and belief systems that are stored from such an early age. And I was like, that's it. I've always been fascinated with the mind. I've always been curious as to how we operate. My favorite question in life has always been why. And so I started looking at institutes here in Australia where I could study hypnotherapy, and I called up a few places. So I'm based in Brisbane, which is in Queensland, in Australia. And a lot of people know of Sydney. So that's an hour and a half flight away from me. And so I called up this one particular place, and they actually had a course starting 10 days later in Sydney. So within the space of a couple of hours, I had organized my children to be either at their dad's for the days that I had to go to Sydney, or going to their family daycare mum at like 5 o'clock in the morning to make it all work. I was flying in and out of Sydney for 4 months for prac on particular weekends, and then everything else was done online. And I remember getting into the class on the first day, like everything just opened up in this most beautiful, like synchronistic way for me to be there. And I remember getting to Sydney, I got in the Uber, I'm on the way to the university. I sat in the class, I'm like, I am so excited to hear about how hypnosis works. And then the first thing they say to us is, we don't actually know how it works. We know it does work and what to do. And so I was so curious from there, and then just learning so much about the subconscious mind, so much about how we're wired as humans to be how we are, and then how our adult lives are shaped so much by all of our experiences that we've had early on in life. And then it was, so that was back in 2018. And then last year now, so 2023, I started studying past life regression therapy. And that goes a little bit deeper as well. So even though I've studied clinical hypnotherapy and strategic psychotherapy for more of that clinical environment, I also play in quite a spiritual space, in the woo-woo space as well. And so to be able to support people to go, if they choose to go back through past lives, to go even deeper into the programming that we carry through lifetimes, through what's called our cell memory, we can go even deeper into healing. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's kind of where it got me. So I was out partying. I was like, how could I help people? And then it just kind of grew from there. And I don't necessarily niche down into, working with women around fuckboys. I kind of move through that. I work a lot around people, finding their purpose and their passion, and then where people sort of hit their ceiling, especially, when they've got a business, where people are hitting their ceilings, when they've got a belief system that's holding them back, or a certain, I call it mind flow as opposed to mindset. A lot of people know the word is mindset. If someone's got a certain mindset around something, we know that we have this beautiful thing called neuroplasticity, where we can change our neural pathways and our belief systems and have a whole different experience of life.
Yeah. So before we go any further, I want it to be made so clear for the audience. And I'm so glad that you led with this, because it is a perfect segue in. So many people are worried about doing hypnosis because of exactly what you just talked about before, that you were up on a stage and you were clucking like a chicken, and anybody could make you do anything, no matter what. And so therefore, if they do hypnosis for me, I'm going to somehow control their mind and tell them to do something that they don't want to do. So what would you say to that fear?
I love this question, because this is something I dabbled in. I actually interviewed on my podcast a friend of mine he's both in clinical and entertainment, so stage hypnosis. He runs an amazing show here in Queensland. And I said to him when we were chatting, I said, like in clinical, we learn about stage, we learn about how it's done, like the process in which they throw out to the audience, and they essentially find the most suggestible person that can easily go into a hypnotic trance in that state. The thing is, Stacey, like if someone says I can't be hypnotized, that's completely true. There is no mind control through any process, whether it's entertainment on a stage or whether it's a clinical environment. And this is where I kind of got really frustrated, because I was like, what stage is doing for clinical is making it look like we have control. But there is a lot of elements that an entertainer has to go through and really just kind of like niche down essentially to the people that are going to be most suggestible and playful on stage as well. I was up on the stage, and I remember I had full control. I was doing everything they said. I mean, you're not going to get up on stage in front of 100, 200 people in the audience and not do what you're being told, because you're putting on a show as well. And yes, there are
people. You asked to be put on stage? Like, did you volunteer?
I put my hand up.
And that's kind of my hello, cluck, cluck. So this is my point. It's like very often when people see the stage hypnosis, as you're calling it, the people that are volunteering want to entertain. They want to perform. You cannot force a suggestion on someone.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's the
same.
And
I think it's really important for people to understand.
Yes. And I explain this so well, when someone's coming into my clinical space, and even beforehand as well, because there is this preconceived idea that we have control over people. And I like to say it as well. Like, if you think of, coming in for hypnosis, sometimes we're actually here to dehypnotize you from the collective perspective, I call it.
Amen.
So if you want to, like, if we really want to talk about what hypnosis is, I mean, from a clinical perspective, from a healing modality, from a therapeutic perspective, what we're doing is we're getting someone in such a deep, relaxed state of being that they start to enter the theta brainwave. So the theta brainwave is the place where you're not quite awake, you're not quite asleep. Yes, you are open to suggestion because your conscious mind takes a bit of a hike. We speak directly to the subconscious mind, and that's when you're most suggestible. And you can speak back as well. You're the one that's seeing the visions and then receiving, the answers that you need on my commands, on my suggestions. But if you're not seeing something, you'll say, well, I don't know what that means, or I don't see it, or nothing's coming to me. And then I'm
Right.
still to take it in a different direction. What people don't tend to understand, Stacey, is that from the ages of 0 to 7 in our lives, we're in that theta brainwave. So all of the pieces of information that we're receiving in our world around us is what's going in and being stored in that subconscious mind and forming all of our belief systems. It's really storing the programming of our computer system, really. So that is the hypnotic practice of the collective.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I always show a little chart, and 0 to 7, I even say that 3 to 6 range is when you're really like constantly in that theta brainwave state. And by the way, like all major marketing companies that put out commercials for kids know exactly what the fuck they're doing.
Yes.
Because they're using the right tonality, the right pitch, the right frequency, the right rapidity, the right language to keep your child in that state, to convince them that this is what they want. That's a side note. But, we're naturally in that state. And when I try to explain to somebody, because they're saying to me, well, am I going to be awake? Am I going to remember? I said, you're in a just zoned out, dazed state. And the two examples I give people is, when you drive somewhere and you've driven there 100 times and you get there and you park the car and you're like, oh my God, how did I even get here? I don't even remember one part of that drive, because you were kind of like on autopilot. That is the type of dazed out state you'll be in. You're awake, but you're just not really present in that way, right? Or if you're watching a movie, consciously, I'm sitting in my living room with a blanket on me with my dog next to me. But when somebody gets murdered or somebody gets terrified in a scene, you jump and scream as if you're in it, because that conscious part of your mind is really sleepy. That's kind of what it's like, in the sense that I always say your subconscious mind is in the driver's seat and your conscious mind is in the back seat.
Right?
That's
so true. Yeah.
And when you talk about the programming, you can use whatever language you want, that we're programmed as children, that we're domesticated as children. But the reality is that we're served suggestions on how to act and how to eat and how to think and what to think and how to label something. We bend down when our kid is in a pram or in a stroller and we go, this is a blade of grass and it's green. And they just accept it as truth. This is the sky and it's blue. They just accept it as truth. So we're feeding them simple suggestions like that, as well as other suggestions. You're an amazing baby. I love you. Or you might be in an environment where you're not being communicated with at all, where you're being told something very stark and different from you're amazing and I love you. They're suggestions, but you accept them again as truth, right? So I always use this analogy. You said programming. I said, imagine your subconscious is a database, and every single experience you've ever had, especially in that, I always say 0 to 12 is like super duper impactful. Every experience you've had in that time frame is stored. It is cataloged on what happened. It is also cataloged with how did you feel? It's cataloged in how did you start to see yourself? What behaviors did you start to form? How do you navigate the world? What are your core beliefs? So then that's the lens through which you're seeing life, yourself, and others around you until it stops working, right? So working with a clinical hypnotherapist or working with somebody like me, I'm not a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm certified in hypnosis, but I utilize rapid transformational therapy as a therapeutic model for it. We're able to help you go back and recognize what core beliefs did you form during that time, and are they still relevant? And if they're not relevant, how can we reframe it to what is relevant now? And how can we install a new core belief? It's like looking at the record in that database that is your subconscious and basically hitting backspace, delete, that doesn't exist anymore. Now we want to install a new belief and reprogram that. So that is a very possible thing to do. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And only if the person wants to and is open to
Absolutely.
it. If they're blocking it, if they're saying, no, I don't want to do this. And of course they're not going to do it because they've got this conscious belief that they don't want to do it. And I mean, it's against, code of all practitioners to violate that to begin with, but you can't force hypnosis onto anyone. And there's a lot of, you can see them, if you're starting to search hypnosis or hypnotherapy, you might come across people on, Instagram ads and stuff where it's like 1, 2, 3 sleep, and then they just kind of drop.
Yeah,
Like there's a lot of process to get people to that. Like there's a lot of bullshit essentially around it to make it look like it's something that it's not as well. And that's in any industry. I mean that's not
and I think it's important for people to understand there's actually a difference between hypnosis and hypnotherapy.
100% there is.
Hypnosis is a state of being.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It is when you're able to get your mind and body so relaxed that you can get yourself into this theta brainwave state. You can put yourself into a theta brainwave state in a lot of different ways and not have hypnotherapy. You can get yourself into a brainwave state that's theta by watching something on YouTube and listening to very specific music.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can get yourself into a theta brainwave state through meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So hypnosis is like a deep state of meditative being where this part of your mind is accessible. The part that is that loves to take in new suggestions or what have you. Hypnotherapy is once you're in that state, there are therapeutic models, lines of questioning, things that can be asked of and guided to the person when they're in hypnosis that allows them to access feelings and the belief systems that are regulating their lives. That's the goal. It's not to force anything, like you said. It's to give you kind of a backdoor access to get to the root cause of why a very particular thing might be challenging you. I personally don't do like the one-offs like for smoking and fear of flying and fear of spiders. I tend to focus on developmental trauma that was unresolved. Right? So experiences that you had in your developmental years over a chronic, prolonged period of time that left a lasting impact that's negatively impacting your life and that you want to change. So we get to the root cause of what are some of the experiences that maybe caused you to think of yourself in a way that is not enough or not deserving of or not worthy of, and start reframing it again under hypnosis. Because when we're in that theta brainwave state and we're suggestible, we can root the fact that it's actually not true in the subconscious as well.
Yeah. Yep. You summed it up so perfectly. And it's such a quick way of getting in there. Some people, like I've had clients come to me and say, I've been working with a psychologist for, 2 to 4 years. And all we're doing is going back and unpacking trauma and I'm reliving everything. Whereas it's a very different way that we do things through hypnosis. And we find that we can get through certain things that have taken years in a more of a, like the clinical psychology environment. We're, smashing out in 2 to 4 sessions, and I also record sessions as well so that people can then continue to listen to it at nighttime and load up essentially those suggestions that we went through in the session as well.
Exactly. So I do the same thing. I call the recording life without the problem. So if they come to me with a significant block in their life, my therapeutic session for them under hypnosis is like 2 to 2.5 hours long. That's that rapid transformational therapy modality. And at the end, I record what I speak into existence at the end. And it's usually 15 to 20 minutes long. And at the end of the session, I'll then mix it with some of that binaural music that is designed to help open up that theta brainwave state. I'll have reinduced them at the beginning of that recording, so they have access to that. And I give it to them to listen to for 21 days, because this is what you were talking about before, which is the neuroplasticity, the rewiring and the potential for refiring these thought processes in a more relevant way. And then I continue to coach them. So this is all done wrapped in around coaching practices. How would you describe neuroplasticity and why it's important in the healing of certain things for people?
Neuroplasticity is something that we've only really been looking at, for the past few decades. We were, once believing, through the science that we had access to, that we were essentially stuck in our ways. And we have sayings that we've continued to reprogram ourselves to continue to a belief system, like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I don't know if you know that one, but there's so many things that we have said over and over again that's actually just reinforcing that belief system until we go, hang on a second, what if I was to just change that belief system? I take my clients, not necessarily my hypno ones, potentially, my coaching clients, through what I call the belief deconstruction, which we can do from a conscious perspective. We don't have to be in a theta brainwave to be able to deconstruct a belief system. But essentially what we do is we dig deep and we go, where did it come from? Whose was it? Was it mum's, dad's, school teachers, friends, aunties, uncles? Like where? Because essentially we're only ever born with two beliefs, and that's two fears: the fear of loud noises and the fear of being dropped. Everything else we've made up along the way. Or we didn't come into this world, we weren't born believing that spiders were scary, or that we were unworthy, or that we could never be happy again because of an experience that we went through. It's all through this, the programming, the experience of life, that all of that information that's gone into the database, like you call it, that's programmed in. And so when we go in and we ask the questions, well, where did this come from? What proof have I found in order to sustain this belief? Because we're creatures of proof. If we keep finding proof for something, we have this, I call it the little magical librarian at the back of the brain, the reticular activating system. So when you have, a thought, for example, and she comes up and she's like, here's all the proof that you need in order to sustain this belief. And she'll show you all of the times, like if you think, oh, I'm a shit human, she's going to be like, here's your information about why you're a shit human. And so when we constantly access that, we're reinforcing our belief. And if we know to be true that we can reinforce a non-nourishing belief, we go, okay, well, what if I was to find proof to support the other end of the spectrum of a nourishing belief? I don't like to use the words positive and negative. I believe that's
I love that you use the word nourishing.
Yeah. Like that's a whole different conversation around the words positive, negative, good and bad, right and wrong. Essentially, it means safe and unsafe, and how our body's going to respond to that. That's why I like to use the word nourishing.
Wait, can we focus on that for a second? First, I noticed that you used the word nourishing, and I thought that was cool, because when I was recording earlier today and I was trying to explain the purpose of the recording that I give, I said it's like it's a diet. You've been feeding your mind junk, and I am now giving you something new to think about, a new series of suggestions. It's like taking sugar out of your coffee. Like, it's not going to feel comfortable at the beginning. You're going to listen to this recording. The first week, you're going to just listen to it to get into the habit of listening to it. The second week, you're going to be like, I actually kind of like the way this makes me feel, and I like this thought process better. The third week, you're going to be scrambling for your phone to find the recording so you can be listening to it because you love the impact it's having on your life, right? So it does nourish you. It's like feeding your mind a new belief. And I love the fact that you don't like to use good or bad, negative or positive, because I feel the same way. Good and bad, negative and positive are just words. They're just labels, but they insinuate a lot, and they completely change the narrative of a story.
And it's what we've been programmed to believe is good and bad, because your version of good is not my version of good. Just like if you said, oh, that's the hardest thing in the world. Say, for example, we're both running 10Ks. I'm not a runner, okay?
Me either, but let's say I am.
let's say you're a runner and you're like, oh, 10Ks is easy. I'm like, that's hard. We're running the same thing. We both have access to legs and running shoes, but we're having a completely different experience. So your version of hard is not mine. It's completely subjective. And so when we start to really dive even deeper into our programming and we realize, well, what have we been taught that's good and bad? What have we been taught that's positive and negative? What have we been taught that's right and wrong? Because you and I, yes, we're both women, humans on planet Earth right now, but we're having such different experience of life. And our subconscious minds, all of our programming is completely different. So of course it's going to be different. So if I say to someone, oh, this is going to be a bad thing, that's my version of bad, not their version of bad. And so that's why I try to use words that don't have a charge in it, like nourishing, to be able to, convey something. Because if I'm saying something to someone under hypnosis and their conscious mind steps in and goes, that's not right, I've lost them. I've lost them for that part of it, because now their conscious mind is coming in to argue with me. So it's so important to be mindful of language that we use, not only from, this therapeutic perspective, but in life in general. I am constantly pulling my clients up on their language. We have this thing where it's like, I'm going to interrupt you and I'm going to let you know some language to switch out here that you might feel as though could be more beneficial to you.
I always say, I'm going to pull it right now. I have this little brain that I use in all of my sessions. Okay. And I'm constantly pointing to the amygdala part of the brain because it's kind of our little alarm center. But what I'm trying to express to people, it's a very smushy brain. I throw it to them. They squeeze it when they're in a session with me, if they're here in my office. And I want them to feel the consistency of it, because really our brain is a sponge. Everything you give it, it's truth. So if you're using language like good or bad, negative or positive, right or wrong, you're feeding it something that may or may not be accurate, or it may not be relevant, or it may not be truth. But your mind doesn't know that. And so your mind is now going to send a series of messages to your body in relation to whatever it is that you're telling. So then I would love nothing more to find one of these brains with a vagus nerve coming out of it.
Yes.
Let me know. I need the whole thing. I need the neck. Yeah. I need the chest. I need the stomach. But, there's this vagus nerve that comes out of the back of your brain and it wraps around your throat, around your lung, around your heart, and into your stomach. And when we are giving ourselves messages that are designed to put us into a threat zone, our body's going to act in kind because that's its job. So now what are we doing? We're having panic attacks. We're having stomach issues. We're having breathing issues. Our heart is racing. We're sweating. We feel like our throat might close up. It's because you've been communicating with your mind in such a way that it feels not enough, or it feels like there's a threat, or there's a fear of safety and security being threatened, and it's going to activate your system. It's as simple as that, even though it's more complex than that, right?
Exactly.
But it is the more simple way to be able to understand why utilizing the appropriate language and nourishing, to your point, your mind with what it is that you do want. And that's not to say, listen, life sucks. Life sucks sometimes. And we lose people die, we experience things, we watch things that are horrible. Like, this is not about toxic positivity. Like, no matter what you see, no matter what you experience, I'm just going to feed my mind with positive, nourishing shit. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when we're going through experiences that create fear in our systems, we have to be very, very careful about how we communicate with our mind and our body, because it listens and it reacts based on what you tell it.
Exactly that. And this is why language, our inner dialogue, our inner, linguistics is so important. And that's a journey as well, because you don't just go, I'm just going to change the way I speak internally. It's something that once you bring conscious awareness in of what it is that's constantly on repeat for you, or that's really not working for you, you can start to go, well, hang on a second. If I shifted a couple of degrees that way and change my language, what would that look like? What would that feel like? Because, you spoke about the vagus nerve. I mean, a lot of people think, like when I ask them, in session, where's the subconscious mind? They're going to point to the head. What actually, the subconscious mind is every single cell in your body, because every single cell in your body is going to have a physiological response based on what's going on in the mind. So if there's fear, I don't know about you, but if I'm on a really tall building and I look over the edge, I get tingles in my feet. That's not happening in my head. I can literally feel that sensation in my feet. If you and I are sitting down watching a show and there's like snakes all over the floor, we're going to be like, oh, 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 our whole body's going to get involved too. We're not just thinking it. Our body's going to get involved because, like you were saying before, like our minds don't know the difference between what is real and what is not. All it knows is what it's having a response to. And so when we know that we can have a non-nourishing response, or a negative response, we can use that word here. If we're having that kind of response, we go, hang on a second. What might happen if we took it to the other end of the spectrum and we hung out in best case scenario for this thing that we're having, anxious thoughts around? If we're having a full conniption over something and then realizing that we're hanging out in a future that doesn't yet exist in our thoughts, in our mind, what if we went to the other end of the spectrum and went, hang on a second. If this was to work out in the best possible way, if this was to have the best possible outcome, what would that look like? What would that feel like? And when we start to play in that space, we can start to come back and, reintegrate that parasympathetic nervous system response, where we're able to think a lot more clearly and, make decisions that are based on, what's best for us at the time, not out of fear and not out of scarcity and not out of survival, essentially.
One of and I agree 100%, by the way, when you talk about, making those minor shifts, just even in the language, the one that I catch people on the most, and I'd love to hear your response to this, is when I'm working with a client, and it has to be a new client, because if it's an existing client, they already know not to say it to me. When they go, well, I have so much anxiety. I have so much depression. I have rheumatoid arthritis. I have issues with my sight. I have. And I listen. And then I say, do you want the anxiety? No. Do you want this ailment? No. Then why are you taking ownership of it? Because again, your mind only can take in what you tell it. Mm-hmm. If you don't want it, all you have to do is reframe it. You can call it the anxiety. I struggle with anxiety. I have struggled in the past with anxiety. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 2020. I will never say, and I'm just going to say it for shits and giggles, so I'm prepping my mind for that. I'll never say to somebody, I have rheumatoid arthritis. What I will say to somebody is, I've been diagnosed with, or I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. Because all it is a label. I don't own it. I don't have it. And when I say it to people, they're like, I've never literally thought about it that way. But why would you take ownership of something you don't want?
And this comes down to the programming, doesn't it? Because we've heard our parents say it, we've heard everyone around us say, and it's not until we go into the language around what's going on in that mind that we realize that we're taking ownership of this. And I don't even use the word anxiety anymore. And this is something
I try not to either, but go ahead.
Yeah. So what I would say to someone, like if you came to me and you're like, I'm having anxiety, I would say, okay, well, where are you having it? Tell me about that. Oh, I'm getting really sweaty palms. I'm, thinking about the future. My heart is racing. I'm like, okay, so where is the anxiety? Oh, it's in my body. Okay, how did it get there? Well, I'm having these thoughts and this. Okay, all right. So your thoughts, where are they? They're in my head. Okay, but where are they? And so I would dig deeper and deeper and deeper until we realized that you don't have anxiety, you have anxious thoughts.
Well, and I even prepare it differently. I do the same thing at the beginning. They'll say, I'm having a panic attack. And I'll say, how do you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll say, well, my heart is racing. My chest is racing. I'm having a hard time swallowing. I'm having a hard time catching my breath. And I say, okay, so why are you telling me that you're having a panic attack instead of saying I'm having a hard time catching my breath? or I feel a constriction in my chest.
Yes.
They're like, well, because it's called panic. And I was like, well, who gave it that name? Because I said, every label has a story.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't called panic and it was called happiness, would your entire mind and body relate differently to it?
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about what you're telling yourself. So I don't even get to the thoughts. I just say, listen, you got to just be honest with yourself. How do you really know it's panic? You're choosing that label. If you're more factual, how about just saying, I feel discomfort in my body?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that discomfort? And most of us are trained to run from it. What can I do to numb it out? I don't want it, versus just sitting with it, listening to it, asking it what it's trying to do for you. And when you do that and it feels like it's being heard, it will kind of melt and lessen.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, dissipate.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things with with anxiety is if let's kind of take it a step further, because as even a clinical practitioner, I cannot diagnose anxiety. I can't even say that I treat anxiety, because it's essentially branded, trademarked by pharmaceutical.
Yep.
And so if you go a step further, of course there's a pharmaceutical problem solver to be like, oh, we'll take this for your anxiety. And if we look at the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, it's the biggest subscription model of our time, isn't it? And so when we start to realize the programming that's come, like, I am not dissing modern medicine whatsoever. The pharmaceutical industry, however, has a lot to answer for, because modern medicine has got us so far and continues to. However, you go to the doctors and you're like, oh, I'm having these thoughts. Okay, here's this pill. You have depression, take this. You have anxiety, take this. You have high blood pressure, take this. And then there's side effects of all of those. So take this for that. And so when we start to look at what's actually going on, you don't go to the doctors and they're like, well, go and do some grounding exercises, do some breath work, meditation, get some fresh air and some sunshine, take the week off work, and I'll see you next week. We don't have that. And, there's a lot of program, there's a lot of hypnotic program used in the pharmaceutical and medical industry to call it health, and it's not actually health. And I'm pretty sure that's a conversation for a different day. But just to realize, when I talk about the mass hypnosis that we've been in, this is what I'm talking about. There's systems that we've been born into, that we exist in, that we've just always taken as gospel, essentially, because that's what our parents did, and that's what their parents did, and that's what everyone around did. And it's only, very much in recent years, we're starting to go, hang on a second, something's not quite matching up here. And so when we start to realize, this mass programming, we start to go, well, hang on, where else is this happening in my life as well? And so, yes, the body is going to have a very normal human response to fear or compromise safety. We want to have that physiological response that we are calling, anxiousness or anxious thoughts, because we are designed to get out of situations to preserve our life. Essentially, all we came here to do was survive, and we'll do anything to preserve that survival. And it's when we start to go deeper inwards under generally hypnosis, to be able to find the programming that decided what it is that safety means to us. How was safety provided to us when we were growing up, and how was safety not provided to us that we're so tiring?
I love that, because I've never used that actual analogy of how is safety provided to us and how was it not provided to us. I always say we only need a handful of things when we're born. We need to know we're going to be fed. We need to know we're going to be hydrated. We need to know we're going to be kept clean, and that we're going to be safe from the elements. But more important than anything, we need to know that we're worthy of love and connection and belonging. And really what you're saying is all those things, those 5 categories, do describe safety and security. So was safety and security by way of those things, food, water, cleanliness, safety from the elements, and connection, available to you or not? And as someone who specializes in trauma, I mean, that is my core specialty. when those things are not available to us before the age of 9, the only decision we can make is it was because of me. I was the reason for that. I'm the reason why somebody can't connect with me. There must be something wrong with me. I must not be enough. I'm being abused because it must be me. We don't have enough of a rational brain developed yet in order to think or believe anything else. And so then we start to live life through this filter, this lens. That is the trauma, not what happened. It's the pervasiveness of how it then negatively affects your life for years, sometimes decades. That is actually the trauma, because those are the blocks that you're talking about. And why do I have this fear, right? Why do I have this block? It's often rooted in how did you choose to believe and see yourself before you were 12 years old, which is crazy, but that's what it is.
Yeah. And you know what you were saying, you know, it's on a spectrum as well, because you might have had a certain amount of love and care and support and food and shelter, but it could have also been conditional as well, and conditional in certain aspects. So it's like, you know, Christmas time, until you give your grandmother a kiss, you don't get the present. Or, you know, until you've cleaned your room, you don't get to eat dinner. Or, you know, one of the things that I like to share with people, Stacey, is that, and I figured this out a couple of years ago, it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I was wondering for years and years why I would go to bed at nighttime, I'd lay down, and that's when the anxious thoughts would start. I would lie there and I wouldn't be able to get to sleep, because that's when my mind started rolling and ruminating on all of the things of the day that had, you know, potentially gone wrong. And I was sitting there and I realized the programming that went in on from such an early age is, if I was naughty, if I did the wrong thing by, you know, my mother's standards, go to your room and think about what you've done wrong.
Oh my God.
I would go to my room. I would lie on my bed, which was my safe space, because that's where I sleep. That's where I'm safe. That's where I'm comfortable. That's where I'm supported by my pillow. I would put my head on the pillow and I'd think, okay, well, I was fighting with my brother and I knocked over a cup and broke it. And my sister said this. And so I got in trouble for that. So I was programmed from such an early age to go to my room, which was my little safe haven, on my bed, to think about everything I'd done wrong. In my adult life, I couldn't get to sleep because I was going to bed thinking about what I had done wrong.
It's a perfect analogy. And the thing is that it wasn't with malintent. No one's saying that to you with malintent. Like, it's so important to understand that these adverse experiences that we have growing up are not always from a place of, I'm trying to harm you.
Exactly.
It was what our parents learned, how they were parented, how their parents were parented, how your great grandparents were parented, where some of these traditions and some of these languages and some of these styles get passed down until they come to people like Jen and I that say, I call bullshit.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't want to really inherit that. And I don't really want that in my invisible backpack. So I'm just going to take that out, say, this is no longer relevant. It's not a part of my lifestyle. And we're going to discard it. We're then usually seen as the problem person, because we then break that cycle and say, I'm not going to do it the way that all of you guys do it anymore.
Yeah. And then to layer in that, when you start to break out of these cycles, this is something that happened with me and my mum, is that when I started changing my belief systems, I started changing my behaviors that weren't in alignment to how she parented. She would say, well, I was the shit parent, wasn't I? So she would go into the victim mode. We actually, you know, we lost that rapport that we had, because we used to actually be, because we were in rapport about things that we had, like that I'd basically downloaded her belief systems. When I changed that, we then didn't connect on certain levels. And when we start to look at this, you know, this thing called family systems, where we look at the download of the child from the parents' belief systems and where they are in the sibling line, and, you know, all of these different factors. I'm my mum's download being the second child. And so all of her belief systems, all of her values essentially were passed on to me biologically. And when I started, you know, doing things that didn't align with her, she was like, oh, I've lost her. Oh, she's lost the plot. Oh, she's gone woo-woo. Oh, she's this. Oh, I just don't even know how to talk to you anymore because you've changed so much. And so what happens is, generally, you know, when we're younger, we'll do anything to stay in that family system, because when we go back, you know, to caveman days, we have to be in tribe in order to survive. There's a leader of the tribe that says this is the way that we do this, and if you are extradited from the tribe, then your safety is compromised. And so it's like, oh, hang on, let me just self-abandon everything that I want to say, do, and believe in order to stay in rapport with the tribe, so I don't get kicked out. It's the same as in the classroom environment when we're children growing up.
Amen.
Same as in the church. I remember growing up in a Catholic church, and there was like, this is like back in the olden days when like barely anyone got divorced. I remember one particular family friend of ours got divorced, and she was shunned. She wasn't allowed to receive communion. She was like not invited places, like literally, because she went, hang on a second, this marriage is not serving me. This is not in my highest good, and I'm checking out of this system. And it was like, oh no, you can't sit with us anymore. And so it was like, well, hang on, what do I have to do in order to be, involved? Self-abandonment. That's when we leave behind all of our wants, needs, desires, pleasures, beliefs, values in order to fit in other areas, in order to feel that connection that we were perhaps lacking to a certain degree in childhood. And so this is why, therapy, hypnotherapy, whatever sort of therapy you're having takes multiple sessions. Is first of all, you're going to have an awakening, realizing all of this. And I hope that that's what, your listeners are going, oh, holy shit, this is like, whoa, right? Then it's the process of breaking down, well, what's real for you? What did that look like for you in your childhood? And then, we can layer it with inner child work. I do little old lady work. So I also go into the future and I check in with my little old lady who's like, what am I doing now to support her? Like her bones, am I getting enough calcium for her? There's so many layers to the therapeutic model of going through this kind of stuff. And holy fuck, it's powerful work. Like it is powerful.
It's powerful work. And guys, it takes time to understand it. But if you're curious, you've got two people here that do it all the time. So Jen, people know how to get in touch with me. Let's have you tell people how they get in touch with you. Where do you share information? How could they learn more about what you do and potentially work with you if they're interested?
Yeah, so I do see clients all around the world. So, I mean, this magical thing that we have called Zoom, and, thank you to the beautiful spicy flu that went around a few years ago, we all had to pivot and take everything online. So I do see in-person clients here in Australia, in Brisbane, but I also can do everything online as well. So my website is jenhamilton.coach with all the W's in front, which no doubt you link to in the show notes. So all of my information and contact details are on there. You can follow me on Instagram. My handle is Jen Hamilton Official, the same as on TikTok. I occasionally post information on there as well. And also I have a podcast called Enlightened. So ENLIFENED. So it's the enlightened journey of life, because I'm all about living life on the, like, let's not just try and get to enlightenment, because to me, like, enlightenment is like, checkmate, we're done.
It is.
I want to live my life. I want to be human. I want to fuck it up. I want to learn the lessons. I want to have fun. I want to, taste all the beautiful things that life has to offer. I want to be able to, get to my deathbed at 104 and be like, holy fuck, that was a wild ride. I don't want to just be like sitting on the top of a mountain, omming to try and get me into a certain space. I want to get down and dirty with all of it. And so, for me, I'm such a lover of life and all of the aspects that come with it. And I've also done, so much in my healing journey that I'm like, I can help people through this. That's essentially why I became a therapist. And we sort of touch on it, but, I do past life regression therapy as well. So things that we have carried through from previous lives that can come through in this lifetime, and multiple lifetimes, as well. Like I talk with a lot of women about, it's called the witch wound. And it's about, what we've carried over, perhaps, if we were living in, we can call them past lives. If we want to get all quantum, we're going to call them parallel lives, because it's happening, all at once.
Yeah.
But our human minds can comprehend past. And so when we do past life regression therapy, we have a look at, certain aspects that have happened in previous lifetimes that, could still be playing out in our subconscious mind now, that we carry through with us, essentially imprinted into us all. And we just,
I would love to have you back on if you'd like to, and come on and talk about that. I have myself gone through QHHT, which is quantum healing hypnotherapy technique, which is a form of past life regression. And when I did that, I actually bartered with a good friend of mine I think she's a level 3 practitioner for QHHT. She did RTT. So we had a good understanding of each other's modalities, and I had quite the experience. And I would love to have you come back on, because again, just like people are fearful of hypnosis, people are fearful of regression and past life experience. And maybe if we educate them a little bit more, they can understand how some of our past life and our past lived experiences can actually be influencing us today. So if you want to come back, I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. Let's do it, because it's a whole new world. It really is. And
it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And it's so powerful, because once you've got the awareness to something, once you bring it from the subconscious into the conscious mind, you've got, different modalities in order to know what to do with it. But if you don't know it's there, like you don't know what you don't know, but when you do know, everything changes.
And you can't unsee it. You just can't unsee it once you see it. So again, guys, it's Jen Hamilton. It's jenhamilton.coach.
Yep.
And if you're in Australia or if you're not in Australia, you can work with Jen. Check her out. And if you like this podcast, you can catch any of my podcasts. All you have to do is go to Flip Your Mindset podcast, wherever you get your casts, hit subscribe, and you'll be notified because I drop a new cast every single Monday. Jen, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And we will have you back.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you.